What happens if we dare to tear off the mask of professionalism and actually risk showing up for real? I'm your host, Miriam Hartness, and this is Unprofessionalism.
The ideal professional is somebody guided by an inner standard of excellence. And I like that. It's kind of a mindset. So if I have a challenge, like, can I teach 4 workshops in one day? Like, of course I can. I'm a goddamn professional. Can we design a brand new workshop in 1 week? Of course we can. We're goddamn professionals. This is a way of thinking about professionalism that has a lot of attraction to me. There's a distinction between the amateur and the professional mindset. When it comes to creating art and creating anything worth creating, the amateur does the work out of love, but only when inspiration strikes. Whereas the professional do the work regardless. I'm very enamored with that idea of a professional. I don't want to be unprofessional when it comes to that. However, there's also the normative professional, and that's somebody who's animated, who's governed not by some internal standard of excellence, but rather by external norms, so conformity to external norms. And this definition of the professional is somebody who shoulds all over themselves. I should dress like this, and I should talk like that, and I should look this way, and I need to do all of these things to be taken seriously and to be safe.
Yes.
And it becomes an inherited script designed around safety and around conformity. And you can think about it as like a game that we learn how to play.
Roy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Miriam. It's wonderful to be here with you again.
Yeah, time to talk about unprofessionalism.
Yes, what a
Maybe.
fun topic.
Yes.
Yeah, and courage for sure. Both are really fun topics. Courage and unprofessionalism, and the courage to be unprofessional. Let's
Thank
go.
you. Yes. And I start with the same question. I have a thing for opening questions, right? Can you share with us maybe an anecdote or a moment where you were unprofessional and it turned out to be maybe one of the best things you could have done?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think to answer it though, the way my mind works, I want to like define terms. And so I want to think about like, what do we mean by what do I mean by professional, and therefore also by unprofessional? And as I was thinking about this, I broke it down into 2 parts, which is kind of the ideal professional and the normative professional. And for me, like, the ideal professional is somebody guided by an inner standard of excellence.
Mm.
And I like that. So for example, at Next Arrow, we refer to ourselves as GDP, goddamn professionals. And it's kind of a mindset. So if I have a challenge, like, can I teach 4 workshops in one day? Like, of course I can. I'm a goddamn professional. Can we design a brand new workshop in 1 week? Of course we can. We're goddamn professionals. So this is a way of thinking about professionalism that has a lot of attraction to me, and it lines up closely. I don't know, are you familiar with Stephen Pressfield's book, The War of Art?
No.
So there's a whole section there about the distinction between the amateur and the professional mindset. And part of the idea here is, like, when it comes to creating art and creating anything worth creating, there's a battle, right? There's a battle within. And the amateur does the work out of love, but only when inspiration strikes. Whereas the professional has the discipline to bring about inspiration. Mm-hmm. They do the work regardless. And so I'm very enamored with that idea of a professional. I don't want to be unprofessional when it comes to that. However, there's also the normative, what I'm going to call, for like a lack of creative word for this, like normative professional. And that's somebody who's animated, who's governed not by some internal standard of excellence, but rather by external norms, so conformity to external norms. And this definition of the professional is somebody who shoulds all over themselves. Right? So I should dress like this, and I should talk like that, and I should look this way, and I need to do all of these things to be taken seriously and to be safe.
Yes.
And it becomes an inherited script designed around safety and around conformity. And you can think about it as like a game that we learn how to play.
Exactly.
But at some point, if we want to do something extraordinary with our lives, we have to stop playing that particular game. We have to outgrow it, so to speak. So Friedrich Nietzsche has this concept that I really like, which is the thou shalt dragon. And he says that intellectual and spiritual maturity requires us to slay the thou shalt dragon. That's a dragon with the words thou shalt on every scale. And the thou shalt is going to be, they're going to represent the inherited rules about what is good, what is true, what is beautiful that we have all internalized.
Yeah.
And at some point in our development, like maturity demands that we start carving our own path. So in that sense, unprofessionalism for me, like that's a badge of honor. And
Welcome
to answer
to the
your
show.
question.
Yes.
And so to answer your question, there have been many moments in my life where I wore that badge of honor. So for example, we both have an academic background. You went just a little bit further than me. So I was ABD, all but dissertation, and I was deep in academia. I spent my life, a good chunk of my life at that point there. I was studying, I was teaching in academia, and that's where I saw my career unfolding, my professional career unfolding. But as I was doing that, and I was even close to the end, I started finding myself being pulled to a completely different world.
Mm-hmm.
And believe it or not, and this doesn't sound romantic at all, it was corporate training. And I really liked it. Like it spoke to me. But the moment it did, that thou shalt dragon reared its head, its ugly head, and said, well, you should finish what you started, and you should stay this path, and you should listen to your parents, and especially your grandmother who wants a doctor, even if you're not that kind of doctor. Like it was all there, and like that normative professional path was laid out for me. And even though that was the case, I said, screw it. And I walked away from that. And fast forward maybe 6 years later, I was working in a company, I was designing trainings, and I was facilitating workshops. And I liked the work that I was doing. I liked the people I was doing it with. But I felt that pull again. And it wasn't to switch professions this time, but it was like I wanted more autonomy so I can be more creative, so I can do things very differently. I wanted, for example, to create like a psych safety workshop that's a murder mystery, and a critical and creative thinking workshop that's designed like a comic book, and a presentation skills workshop that's a video game. And so I decided again, screw it, I'm going to do this. And it was in the middle of a raging pandemic. I had just bought my first house, so we're paying mortgage on this. And I had 2 little babies. And I was like, this is a terrible time to do this. But I threw my knapsack over the wall and said, I need to get to the other side. I gave myself 9 months to do it. And I did it. And I fortunately it took less than 9 months, but I created what it is that I wanted to do. I wanted to wake up and live my own dreams. And it took some courage to do so. And not surprisingly, I built my company around this virtue of courage, is centered around courage. So I guess those are a couple of stories. It's a very long response to a very short question, but here we are.
Thank you for taking the time. And what I hear is the courage, that unprofessionalism in this context. And thank you for taking a little bit of time to lay it out, because that's exactly the aim of the podcast. So we are not discussing whether we are not showing up as the experts we are, or we are not putting our clients first.
Right.
So what I hear is the courage to do things differently in creative ways. So it's almost a way of self-expression.
Yes.
And why do you think why was it an act of courage to decide to make psychological safety a murder mystery and to use comic books?
Yeah. It's an act of courage because you're taking a worthwhile risk, right? And you have a lot at stake. So if you're leaving something that's predictable, that's secure, that's rewarding, and you're going into something that's very, very uncertain, and you don't know if you're going to succeed, and you're not just on your own, you have a family, right? And you're thinking about the people you're going to impact as well. And so this is why it takes courage to do something like that. Yeah. Specifically to get creative, of course, you don't know if that's going to work or that's not going to work, because it's not what your competitors are doing.
Yeah.
And so there's the risk factor in there as well.
And I think this brings us to the point that you mentioned earlier, the kind of toxic professionalism, the shoulds, the
Yes.
the norms, what other people are doing, what other people tell you to do. So it's the safe way to just do what your competitors do, to do what your family expects from you.
Right.
It's almost as if, and that's what I hear, if then we fail, we can blame the world for it, but it's not our fault. If we're taking our own path and say, screw all of you,
Yeah.
I do it my way, then if you fail, it's your fault.
Yeah. And that's scary, right? That's very scary. I'm sure, I mean, don't underestimate the human's mind capacity to blame others. It will find a way to say it's somebody else, it's somebody else's fault. But absolutely, you're taking responsibility for your own path. That's why I mentioned Nietzsche and intellectual and spiritual maturity, right? And it's like you have to free yourself, emancipate yourself from a certain way of thinking and a certain way of being.
Yeah.
And there's a place for that, especially in creative and innovative endeavors.
Yeah. Did you pay a cost in terms of status?
So in that particular instance, I did not pay a cost. I took a risk and it panned out, right? So I am very fortunate and there's an element here of luck as well, right? So that's why I say I'm very fortunate. I'm really grateful for all of that. And we created a company. The company is Nextera, and the company is successful. And we're having an impact on a lot of people and helping folks develop skills and courage for sustained excellence in the work that they're doing. So there I didn't, but there have been other times where I have paid a cost. And that's part of, it's a ticket of admission. There's no guarantee. Otherwise, there's no courage, right? No guarantee that it's going to work out. And the same thing, of course, when you're doing your own thing, like we're successful now and hopefully continue to be successful in the long run. But there are a lot of variables outside of your control that could impact that. And you continue to take a risk. It's ongoing.
Yeah. There are a few things that I would love to unpack. You spoke about the ticket of admission.
Yeah.
So you entered a space through that act of courage, through that decision, and you spoke about luck. And I wonder whether it is actually luck or whether it's a story that I'm telling myself, because I can very much relate to what you shared. I also left a well-paid career, the status, university, all of that behind to start my own company, to start as a freelancer, not knowing what I do. And now run a successful company. And I wonder whether instead of luck, it is actually this initial courage that you described and the act of self-expression that actually got you there because you dare to differentiate yourself from the pack and to do something that is different, but will then stand out of all the competitors who do the same.
Yeah, I think that when you go on your own path like this, as scary as it might be, there are like helpers that come along, right? There are people and there are events and there are things that happen and you set this in motion, but you don't do this alone, right? And there are variables outside of your control. And I'm for example, I'm so grateful to have the team that I have and the people that I work with. And of course, there's luck in meeting them and working with them as well. And, this is where gratitude comes in. Like what can we be grateful for? We're grateful for good things in our lives that we didn't necessarily deserve, that are not our own doing. And that just came along the way. But yes, you helped initiate a chain of events, right? And you followed your bliss, and to paraphrase Joseph Campbell, like doors open where walls existed, right? And so there's that element, I think, that accords with what you're saying. But when you get through that door and all of a sudden you meet these individuals, or you're faced with certain challenges that provide you the opportunity to be resilient and resilient, all of that can be outside of your control. And there's an element of luck, I think, that's involved in our journey. And it keeps us humble, I think, to recognize that it's not all our own doing.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. You build a business around courage.
Yes.
And when we think of the professional world, what role does courage play? Why is it lacking? And what becomes possible if we are courageous?
It's a great question, and what a fun topic. Unprofessionalism and courage is such a fun topic. So courage, you can think in the context of work as courage as the link or the bridge between knowing what to do and doing it. Like I know, yeah, the knowing doing gap. That's the mediator, right? That's the in between. So I know that I need to give feedback, but the doing is hard, scary, it's tough. I know that I need to set boundaries, but the doing is hard. I know I need to negotiate, but the doing is hard. I know I need to speak in front of others, but the doing is hard. So courage is what enables us to bridge that. And that's why it's so important. And you ask also, why is it lacking? It's lacking because it's scary. It's scary to take risks because there's a threat. It might not go well. It might not go well for you. And that's part of the reason why I emphasize courage, because it helps us like really achieve extraordinary things. And without it, we can't.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because I would think that courage, when I listen to you, must actually be part of the professional equation, and professional in the best sense of the term. The taking the calculated risk to do what is necessary to stand by your word, to live a life of integrity, to create clarity, transparency, and all of that.
Yeah, you need it for excellence.
Yeah,
and you need it to live in accord with your values and your own inner standards. Like you're gonna face obstacles, because it is different than anything extraordinary is gonna be difficult to achieve. And if you're doing something that goes against the norm or against the grain or something new, something novel, it's even harder. And so absolutely it's necessary. And what I try to do in a lot of my training is to give people like the tools to achieve that.
Yeah.
And I even have Miriam, a courage formula. Or you mentioned formula. So I actually have a formula. So you can define courage as taking worthwhile risks, right? That's a definition of courage, or do something hard in spite of your fears. Building on that, I think of courage as power times purpose divided by dragons. And so what I want to teach people when it comes to teaching them how to be more courageous is really to strengthen the numerator and to begin to shrink the denominator. And I have many different ways of doing that, but I'll pause here, just get your thoughts.
So the dragons are basically the overthinking, the monkey mind, all these obstacles we see that might get in the way of our courageous actions.
Yeah. I think we need to differentiate when we talk about dragons, between dragons as conceived in the East, say in China or in Japan, which is a very positive symbol. It represents the vitality of life. And dragons as conceived in the medieval West. Think of like Game of Thrones or House of Dragons. And these are symbolically, you can think of these dragons as you said, like it's that inner voice. It's the negative emotions. It's the fear, and it's the doubt, and it's anxiety, and it's all the stuff that gets in the way of you achieving your goals. And the question is, how do you shrink that?
Yeah.
And I'm happy to share some ideas around that, but that's what we mean by dragons.
Yeah. And I would be curious to hear about that, because what I find funny around this topic is that in theory we are afraid of being courageous or being vulnerable. Although when we are, in most of the times when we are courageous out of integrity, we get rewarded and people are grateful. If I'm sharing the feedback, the difficult feedback, but it's heartfelt and it comes from a place of care because I want the other person to grow, they are thankful. Recently, I shared on LinkedIn mistakes that I did throughout my business since I started. And I just listed them and called it a waste of time and energy. Because, yes, I did learn, but it wasn't an investment. And everyone said that was so courageous to share that. Whereas for me, it was like, it wasn't sharing my mistakes. I did them. We all do them. So where does this mismatch come from? That we assume the worst and therefore don't do it? And how can we train our courage?
Okay. This very interesting, very rich question. There's a few threads that I want to pull on. First of all, there is the subjective nature of courage. So what's courageous for you might be different than what's courageous for me. So for some of those folks who are writing those comments, it's like super courageous because for them, they can't even imagine doing something like this in public. But Miriam, for you, maybe it wasn't such a big deal to write that down. I don't know if it was. Like, you can define in the literature the separate between physical courage, which you're jumping to the fire to save somebody's life, moral courage, which is kind of standing up for a principle, for example, and then psychological courage, and that's very, very, very subjective. So for some people, leaving their home takes courage because they're agoraphobic. For others, it means nothing. Right. But it takes a lot for them to fly on a plane if they have fear of heights or whatever it is. There's a subjective element to psychological courage. And I think so that's part of it. That's one thread. The second thread here I think in what you're saying, which is also very interesting, is when you think about like that gap between you say, I would do it and I'm going to get the reward. And so what's hard about doing something like this? And there's no guarantee that you're going to get the reward. There's uncertainty that's baked into it, right? It's taking worthwhile risks. There is a risk involved in all of this. So you may not get it. And we usually don't even celebrate like failed efforts as courage. We don't label it as courage, as an accolade. We don't do it, but it is courage. You just didn't succeed. But it is courage nevertheless.
True, there's shame involved in that, the failed courage.
Yes. Yes.
But yeah.
Yes. There's shame involved in that. And I think that's really interesting. And then the third thread of your question is like, how do we train it? And I'll share with you different ways of doing that. But I want to pause here because I said a lot, and I don't know if you want to play with that, or should we just go into how do we train it?
I think I want to go into how do we train it, because otherwise we get lost in the tangents. I only want to drop one word that came to my mind, and maybe you can come back to that later. Is compassion.
Compassion. Yeah.
Somehow it felt related to courage and to dare to do it despite it being difficult. Stepping in someone else's shoes, my courage might not be your courage. So there's also compassion in that.
There is, I'm animated by courage, by curiosity, and by compassion. Those are my 3 C's, right? And the origin of the word compassion means to suffer with somebody else, right? Like the passion of the Christ, the suffering of the Christ. So it's with somebody else. And there is probably a lot of courage that's sometimes involved in showing true compassion to somebody else, whether or not you get anything in return. So coming back to the thing of like, is it rewarding or is it not rewarding?
Yeah.
You do it anyway because you're compelled to do it.
Yeah.
Right. But whether or not it's rewarding or not. But I don't know if that gives you anything here, or you want to switch to how do we train courage?
Yes, let's go there. And then I have a follow-up question derived from the previous that I will park right here.
Okay. So coming back to the formula, what I like to do is say, okay, call it the 25% courage challenge. And Miriam, I'll put you on the spot. You can edit this out if you don't like your answer. But
it'd be so unprofessional.
If you had 25% more courage than you currently do, what would you do with that courage?
I would be more bold in inviting specific guests on the podcast. I would reach out to potential clients where I'm sure that they would benefit from what we are doing and what we are offering. I would be more clear with my feedback, and I would curse more on the show.
Fuck yeah.
Yeah, hell yeah. Yeah. And that's these are just on top of my mind. I think I could sit here for the entire day and continue the list. Thank you, Fast.
Yeah. By the way, the unintentional consequence of cursing a lot is I have a 7-year-old who speaks like a sailor, like, and I send him to school, and the emails I get back from the teachers is no good. Okay, so you would do all these things, great. So what I would do, and we would take now, if we were doing this together, you have your goal. We're going to now plug that into the courage formula. So the question here, so we got power times purpose divided by dragons. Power is your capacity for action. Purpose is going to be the reason for action, and dragons are resistance to action.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we're going to start with dragons, and we're going to try to understand, like, what are the dragons? What's preventing you from doing this right now?
Mm-hmm. Ooh.
What would you say?
Fear of rejection. So why am I not reaching out to some people to invite them on the podcast? I won't die if I did, but
yeah,
there's a fear of rejection. Not good enough. It will just confirm all the noise in my head.
All right. And we could go deeper into this, is like, well, why is rejection? Like, why does that matter? And we have that conversation. I have 2 tools that I like to use in helping people, like, shrink those dragons. And one is just to have that conversation, and why, just keep asking why until we get to, like, the core issue here. But we're not going to do that right now. One of the tools, and you and I have talked about this in the past in the context of having courageous conversations, is something that I call a dragon audit, something that we call at Nextero a dragon audit. And it consists of 2 questions, which is, what is the potential cost of action, and what is the potential cost of inaction? Mm-hmm. So if you do this and get, you say, well, I'm going to get rejected, and somebody's going to think less of me, and so forth and so on. You're going to write these things down. And say, well, what happens if you do nothing? Right? And you're going to start writing that down. Yeah. And so that's the value of doing this as an exercise, is that it helps you organize your thinking a little bit. Think a little bit more strategic about your challenge, bringing a potential future into the present for yourself and others, reducing or attenuating, taking some of the oxygen away from the negative fears by just writing them down. And if you do it with somebody else, even more so. And then finally, engendering courage. And it does that. The reason it helps engender courage is that if you look at what people write in the first column, a lot of it is centered around themselves. Like, people won't like me, they'll think less of me, and I might say something wrong, I'll look bad, and so forth. It's centered inwards. Whereas the second column tends to be much more focused on something beyond yourself. It's centered outwards. So what impact would that have on my business, or on my partner, or on the community that I'm trying to impact, or on them? Yeah. And what does that have to do with courage? Well, if you look at the literature on the psychology of courage, one of the most dominant strategies that people utilize in order to engender courage is to link up their actions to something bigger than themselves. Mm. Yeah. Yes, I feel anxiety, but there's something more important at stake. And so by just doing this as an exercise for 3 minutes, it helps shrink those dragons. Yeah. The second thing that I recommend there is, you probably are familiar, and I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with the literature on affective labeling, the idea of, like, name it to tame it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so this is research that's done out of UCLA that shows that when you name and identify an emotion, it helps attenuate the power of the emotion itself. Now, I took that very literally, and I said, what if we name the dragon, but give it a comical name? Mm. Because anxiety and humor don't mix well together. Yeah. So if you were to, Miriam, give that dragon a name, and it doesn't have to be a silly name, but if you were to give it a silly name, what would it be, and why?
I would call it something like Benny the Box.
Benny the Boss or the Box?
The Box.
The Box, so, okay.
Benny who stays in the box, anxious to come out to see the world.
Yeah. So here comes Benny, or here comes Benny the Box. I like that it's an alliteration. So yeah, so you would call, you just name it. And that's one way of addressing it. So here are ways of attenuating that dragon, reducing that denominator. And from there, we're going to move on to the numerator and break that down. But I'll pause here because, again, I've said a lot. Yeah. Thoughts, questions, what you got?
Yeah, it's so the moment you asked me to to name all the things that I would like to be 25% more courageous. That felt great. And I realized already this helped me to just see opportunities. And then when you asked me why, almost immediately I wanted to laugh about myself. Or I wanted, let me use some compassion. I wanted to hug myself for the silliness. Because reaching out to someone to be on the show, there's literally no cost involved. They wouldn't even think badly of me. They would maybe think I don't have time for that. So there's not even a consequence. So I can totally see the value of the iteration of why questions, because clearly this cannot be the real reason why I'm not doing that. There must be something else behind. And I think this can be very interesting then to see it. And then by giving it a name is also a nice way to remember in a playful way. Oh,
Right.
Benny in his box again.
Benny trying to come out of his box. Yeah. Or pull you into his box. Yeah.
Exactly. And then it's a way to remind ourselves, or even if it's in a team or in a partnership, to just use a new language around a topic that is otherwise difficult to address. I can see if you want to have more courageous conversations with someone and you identify that it requires courage that you don't have, and then you give it a name, can also help bring some more ease into it.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
And so if we go to the numerator now, power. And here, the question becomes like, how do I increase my ability to achieve the goals and my capacity to impact my environment? And power is essential for courage, because like imagine, for the analogy I like to give is like, imagine you see somebody drowning and you decide that you need to go in and save them, but you don't know how to swim. How's that going to end up? You need the power, you need the ability to affect your environment to achieve your goal in this way. And so the loop here is between learning and doing. Mm-hmm. That's what we want to focus on. And thinking about like, what is it that I need to do to learn in order to do to take the actions in a more optimal way, a more effective way, and then go from knowledge acquisition to knowledge application and try it out. And when it comes to courage, maybe you don't start like at the top. Like you have a fear of heights. You don't start with flying or climbing Mount Everest. You start small. And so I talk about a courage rope, where you take one small step and then and gradually increase the challenge and increase the challenge. And we have decades of research that shows us that one of the most effective ways to overcome your own fears and anxieties to expose yourself to the very thing that scares you. And that's the application part. Yeah. So figure out, how do I want to learn? And then how do I want to apply what it is I want to learn? And then you up your power to enable you to achieve success there. So I'm wondering, again, in your example, and it could be, by the way, that just one part of the formula is a part you need to focus on. Mm-hmm. And usually it's a case of one needs more attention than another. But what comes to mind when you think about upping your power, your ability to get this done?
And that's an interesting one, because it requires the ability to objectively look at capabilities. So the example with the podcast, for instance, am I already at the level to invite specific guests? With my business, do I have the capacity to serve the clients I would like to serve? And then to see, okay, what do I need to invest in? Or what do I need to highlight, to show?
Yeah.
So that the power becomes obvious for those I want to reach. And right. I can imagine that by doing this inventory and being honest to oneself and the limits of the capability or not, that it then reinforces the courage, because we better understand. I would better understand what I'm actually talking about.
Exactly. So you're accruing resources and skills to achieve this.
And maybe apply a little bit of patience also. Because I think for the podcast, I just launched. I can wait a little bit and let the podcast speak for itself. I'm not in a rush. For the business, maybe it's not so much about patience. Maybe it's just about getting the numbers out so that I can show what we have achieved so far already.
Yes. Love it. Last part here is purpose. That's the reason for the action in the first place. And here you're answering, what or who does my courage serve? And another question that can be helpful here is, what identity can I wear? What self-transcendent identity can I wear to enable me to act more courageously? I'm wondering, how might you answer those questions?
So and it's very interesting, because here, of course, with the podcast, I would if I invite someone I admire and I want their word to come out, it's the benefit for the audience. Hopefully also the benefit for them to have access to a new audience and to amplify their words and their message. For the clients, I do believe that we deliver amazing value. And I would love more professionals in the corporate to learn more about psychological safety and have more of it in their so there's a higher purpose that goes beyond myself. And it just made me think that maybe then, if the purpose is only self-directed, then it turns the courage into a toxicity, maybe. If we're only focused for our self-worth.
Yeah. It's such a profound point, Miriam. It really is, because there is a moral dimension to courage. And just think about it. Like, imagine like a scenario where you go into a hospital and you see two people in a burn unit, and they're lying there, and you ask, like, well, what happened? And the doctor tells you, well, this first person, he went in to try to save this kid from a burning building, and he got burnt. And then the question is, like, is that person courageous? Like, of course that person's courageous. What about the second person? The second person went in for a selfie for their Instagram. Like, that's what they did. It is like, is that person courageous? Most people would not label that person courageous. They would label that person as dumb, as stupid, right? That example, by the way, comes from the work of Cynthia Puri, who is a great researcher on courage. I have to give her the credit for that example. But it really illustrates the point that you're making here, is that there not only a subjective but a moral component to courage, to evaluating something, identifying something as courageous.
I was wondering whether this last part answered my question that I parked here about the limitations of courage. Yeah. When does courage become harmful? Or
I think that when it's completely self-serving, it does, right? It runs the risk of doing that. There's an element of it which can be innocuous as well, in that the person who's trying to overcome their own like phobias for themselves and so on, like that, there's no problem there, right? But when it comes at the expense of other people and harms other people, I would not even call it courageous, because it's missing the moral component. That's what courage is, a virtue. And it's the virtue, Aristotle talked about, is a virtue that's underpinning all the other virtues. So Aristotle talked about that. C.S. Lewis talked about that, and Maya Angelou talked about that. And I think that's what they're getting at.
Yeah. And then I wonder, so for me, what just clicked for me was that a professional would then be able to assess the impact of the courage and the origins. So for instance, if a CEO can be courageous by taking a decision that might be against the majority's thoughts, can take a risk because they really believe in it, that it will be successful, would be a courageous act if it has been thought through and based on very clear assessment. It would be considered not courageous, but maybe dumb or unprofessional, really, if it's just an act of courage without doing the due diligence.
Yes. And in the research on courage, in contrast to the way courage is often thought of, the vast majority of courageous decisions are done with deliberation. They're not split-second decisions. They're not like, oh, I just jumped into the road to like push my kid out of the way without thought. It's deliberation, hours, days, months of you thinking about whether this is something that we need to be doing or that I need to be doing. And what the courage formula allows people is to think about this in a more like systematic and clear fashion.
And maybe then also growing the muscle. Because if you
Yes.
now with my list of 1,000,000 items, I can be more courageous. Maybe I can start just working on one that doesn't imply a lot of risk, that is easy to do. And every day going to the courage gym.
I love it. And let's rename it as the 26% courage, the courage challenge, because we're in 2026. So this is your 26% courage challenge. Start with one thing.
Yes. Thank you. Time is running when you're having fun.
Indeed.
And I close with the same question. What is an, air quotes, unprofessional act in the sense of the podcast, in the meaning of the podcast, that you would still advise others to do?
I'll go back to my first intellectual hero, which was Joseph Campbell, and this idea of following your bliss. And when you do so, that doors open where walls exist. I think when you do that, when you're in the presence of somebody who does that, it's vivifying. It's something very, very powerful. And when you're doing that, you're on the right track, as scary as it may be. It means figuring out what that is and what gets you out of bed in the morning. And what's the last thing you think about when you go to sleep? What do you dream about, and what gets you out of bed? And then follow that path and have the courage to follow that path.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Always so inspiring to talk to you. This was a conversation without the script. Now it's your turn. I'm Miriam Hadness, and this has been Unprofessionalism.